Welcome to a special series called The Global Crisis Monitor, featured on the Treasury Update podcast. Thank you for joining. On this episode of the Global Recovery Monitor podcast series, host Meredith Zonsius catches up with Craig Jeffery and Alexa Cook of Strategic Treasure on the 12th period results from the COVID-19 Impact and Response Survey. Top headlines include significant challenges in the work-from-home environment, vendor payments slowing down, organizational outlook on liquidity positions, economic improvements, and health and financial normalcy. Listen into this brief update as key findings are revealed on the global state of recovery. Welcome to the show, Craig and Alexa.
Thanks, Meredith. Happy to be here.
Yeah, it's good to be here again covering this topic.
We are now 12 survey periods into the Global Recovery Monitor. Let's start off with the top headlines.
Yeah, I'll cover a few of them. So 3 interesting things this period. Vendors are being paid more slowly than we've seen throughout the monitor. Pretty interesting information. And companies and people are returning to work on a slow basis, but more are returning to work than are moving remote. And there are definitely some significant challenges in the work-from-home environment. Those are some of the headlines of what we'll get into later. But I'll just cover 2 financial highlights, both negative and positive. AR and fiscal policy have been the most negative on a period-over-period basis. So that's several weeks for both of those together to be quite negative. AR has always been negative. And then on the typical positive side, organizational liquidity has improved. This is 8 survey periods, covering about 3 months, maybe a little bit more than 3 months now. But 43% viewed their liquidity position improving or more positive, and just under 11% saw it more negative. And this was the most positive and least negative on that front too.
And then I'll do a quick touch on some of those economic highlights. So that 3-month outlook is almost at equilibrium, and that's just a little bit higher than the last period. And our 12-month outlook has muted a bit since the last month. And from this measure, that makes the full economic recovery still sitting at just about a 4 or 4.5 month outlook, which is still about the same as last period. And that makes the full recovery estimate at about December of 2021.
This past survey period, we have added in a few survey questions on challenges with working from home and employee working locations. Can you walk us through some of this period's findings?
This was a question we added this time. What were some of the challenges? And there was a number to choose from, but almost 2/3, 63%, said one of the biggest challenge was a never-ending work mindset. This, I don't have a break. I'm working at home. I'm always there. That's very interesting. I'm sure some sociologists will do some studies on that and tell us what that means. The second biggest issue was from the work from home environment was technology issues, and that was just over 50%. Communications, a decrease in our team or organization's effective communication, that was just under 40% identified that as a significant issue. So that came in at number 3. Increased distractions and interruptions. I think we can all relate to that with cats and dogs and kids and everything else going on. That was about 1 in 6. 2 categories: general productivity decline and some individuals on the team having significant productivity decline. Those 2 together equaled about the same on the increased distraction. So about 1 in 6 identified either general productivity decline or some individuals really having a significant productivity decline because of their situation. On the staff location for where people are working, about 1/3 of organizations said more workers are back on site. So didn't say how many, but 1/3 had more on site in this last period, over the prior period. And more workers working remote still, so there's still a movement home or away from work of about 13.5%, which shows a net, 1 in 5 firms have more workers back on site for those that move. And it's right around 50% have the same number on and off site as they did before.
You had said that there were some changes with the top concerns. Can you give us a quick rundown on what those changes were?
Yeah, certainly, Meredith. The top two last period were COVID health concerns and then COVID response and impact. Those were number 2 last time. They're number 2 this time as well. Then this period, geopolitical and military aggressiveness took number 3. It moved up to number 3, concerns about military movements. We've seen stuff with China and India, the South China Sea, et cetera. So those might have been factoring into people's responses there. 4th place was elections. And then when we look at the traditional week over week or period over period top concerns, the forced ranking that we've had for almost every single period during the length of the monitor, number 1 was direct financial impact. That's not a change. Recession in the regions we operate came in at number 2, but then back at the top for those that selected the number 1 item, in 3rd place was staff safety protocol. So that's back in the ranking. That was up early. That was up as people started contemplating coming back to work a number of weeks ago, and now it's moved back up fairly high during the monitor. 4th place, we see access to adequate liquidity has moved down, and that correlates nicely with people saying on a week over week basis their organizational liquidity position has improved. I think we've seen that over 8 periods, which makes up more than 3 months. So just kind of interesting to see how those concerns have changed as we've moved through the crisis and into the recovery across some of those different factors.
Yeah, that's very interesting. How are the time estimates for health and financial normalcy looking?
So on the health outlook, the extension of time until COVID-19 becomes a minor health issue has decreased back down to about 8.5 months from 11.5 months in the prior period. And then the inflection point has increased to 2 months, which is the longest I think we've seen so far in the survey. And then 1 in 3 respondents have felt that we've already hit the peak. And then for financial normalcy in individual businesses, that's coming in about 8 months, which was a 3-month decrease from last period.
So each period, that I typically ask you about AR and fiscal policy. Any changes on the negative outlooks here?
Yeah, so in the period over period, that's still negative for AR, and that's bumped back up, sitting at about 4 times negative. I believe last period it was at 2 times negative. And then for fiscal policy, that's also reflecting negatively and is sitting at about 3 times negative. And then I think Craig mentioned it at the start of this podcast. The paying vendors and suppliers, over 40% of companies are paying vendors and suppliers on a more extended basis.
Before we wrap up the episode, what do we need to be thinking about for the weeks ahead?
I like that question, Meredith. We are changing our survey frequency to a 4-week period now. From a 2-week cycle. We started off 8 weeks at a single week. Every week we were doing a complete survey. Then we extended it to 2 weeks. And now I think we're at the point as we move through the recovery. Obviously, there's a lot of noise each way. We're doing a 4-week clip, so just under a month. We're cycling back about 4 older questions. So we'll be able to take some measurements from what we had earlier, comparing it to what we see during July. We've also added about 4 new questions covering different topics that I think you'll find quite interesting. And so for those who are listening to this podcast, please go ahead and take the 5-minute survey. You can go to treasurycoalition.com and you can go from there to the survey. And it really takes about 5 minutes, and you'll get the results, and you'll help contribute to what the industry as a whole is thinking and doing.
We wanted to encourage you to take the Global Crisis Monitor Survey repeatedly while it's live. It runs from Wednesday to Tuesday every week. You can go to treasurycoalition.com and follow the links. Add your voice and insight so that as a profession, we can take positive and knowledgeable steps to move our organizations and nations forward. Invest 5 minutes each week at treasurycoalition.com and get great information and insights while helping our profession and organizations.
This podcast is provided for informational purposes only, and statements made by Strategic Treasurer LLC on this podcast are not intended as legal, business, consulting, or tax advice. For more information, visit and bookmark strategictreasurer.com.